Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This is going to be the last one for episode 2, which marks being not fully a quarter of the way through, because I'm pretty sure the later episodes are going to be longer, but technically 1/4 of the way through the entirety of Umineko. This video is going to contain full spoilers for the entirety of the game, so don't watch if you haven't played it. You won't know what I'm talking about. None of it's going to make sense to you, even if you don't care about spoilers. And this episode has content warnings for torture, forced feeding, cannibalism, all of this stuff. I'm not actually going to be describing any of that in particular detail, but it will be on screen in the footage and there will be narration explaining it. Again, not very visual because that's what Umineko is, but there'll be a lot of text explaining it. There's also a content warning for child abuse, which is something I will be discussing. Pretty broadly, I'm not going to get too in-depth to it, but it does come up repeatedly. But before we even talk about the tea parties, we do need to talk about the answer to the mystery from episode 2. And I won't dwell on the specifics of it, but there's actually some important thematic points I do want to wrap back around to on it. It turns out I was deeply wrong to simply trust Gohda. Gohda was an accomplice, and not a very good one. And one thing I find interesting about that is I didn't think of Gohda as an accomplice because he's pretty cowardly and also very fumbly with his words. I took that more as him being just bad at giving lines, but in that sense he functions as good risk for the magic. Like, he is a way in which a person could pick up on a clue and then be like, wait a minute, what's going on here? But also, I bought into a narrative that I realized I should not have read into so much. Part of why I thought Gohda was trustworthy was because Gohda has, at least as claimed by Battler, a deep respect for Natsuhi because of her kind of quote-unquote saving him. Now, if you dig into that narrative a little bit, I don't know if she's really saving him if he is giving her his labor in exchange for money. The gracious thing she did was offer him an opportunity to work. But he's clearly good at his job. It's not like he's a charity case. It's not like he's doing really poorly, but she continues to pay him and overlooks his poor efforts or anything like that. He's just clearly capable of what she is looking for, and so he is being paid for it. And it's something that, in retrospect, especially rich families who employ servants perhaps like to feel as if there's more of a fair transactional relationship going on here. That perhaps Gohda was in a bad place, but by being given a job, he's now happy and satisfied. And importantly, there's an assumption that he's getting plenty of money and that it's simply no more he could need. And that, say, he would have a kind of loyalty and real respect for Natsuhi beyond just, oh, this is my boss and I need my boss to think well of me. But there's no reason why he wouldn't then go, oh, if I could just get a ton of money, absolutely I'll go along with this. Especially, I think, important to think about with the culprits and the different levels of complicity, is that they may not, strictly speaking, be directly involved in any murders so much as they might just be involved in lying about them. And there's extents to which the information about the murders can be obfuscated from them, such as episode 1, where Eva and Hideyoshi did not think there were going to be more murders until it happened to them. So, faith lost in Gohda. I will suspect him from now on. I'll also be better about thinking about the fact that the accomplices will be different. Look forward to episode 3, where that's going to be fun, because I'm pretty sure it's 2 different culprits fighting each other. And then the other point, which I did basically get, was that Rosa is an accomplice, she's in on it, she's supporting all the narrative, but is still a little bit too paranoid to accept it, and so really throws a lot of chaos into the game in a way that Beatrice is intending, like that is what she wanted to happen. Because one thing I didn't think about with regards to that is Rosa knows mostly what's going on. She obviously doesn't fully understand the situation, but despite being someone that's clued in, she still manages to be really paranoid. Because then you realize she knows everyone's being paid off, and so she knows there's no reason to think of people as being loyal. She knows who's wolves, but not necessarily exactly who the wolves are, and she doesn't know whether or not they're wolves aligned with her as a fellow wolf, or if they're wolves that would turn against her. Like I said before, the wolves and sheep is a puzzle that works because it has abstracted rules. But in real life, people do not exist in a binary state of enemy or friend. And the same is true when Rosa makes herself a wolf, but then isn't quite sure if the other wolves will turn on her or not. When you consider in particular that she turned on her siblings and their spouses, and there's a lot of trauma and reasons for that we will get to, but she had a very personal relationship to all those people and turned on them. Why would the servants not turn on the person who's just their boss that visits once a year? So, you can see why Rosa had a complete inability to trust anyone. With all of that said, let's talk about Rosa's tea time, her reward for supporting Beatrice's game. One thing I enjoy here is early on, Beatrice is kind of putting on a very cordial and like, oh, here's a reward, like this is a nice thing for you. I understand the kind of pain you have had. I understand that there are cracks that cannot be filled. She talks about how Gold doesn't simply deal with the trauma of her older siblings, but that Gold is only one thing to help with logistical issues. But Beatrice says, as a witch, she is able to fix trauma. And there's some complicated stuff Beatrice expresses here, where she's clearly partly talking about herself. She talks about how if a wound heals over with something still inside of it, you actually have to reopen the wound to get that thing out. Which I agreed as basically being about the ways in which the Ashurmias never really deal with their trauma or understand their behavior as perpetuating that same trauma onto others. Kinzo has multiple times been described as an abusive father. Multiple of his children continue to perpetuate that onto their own children after him. To actually try to move on from this, they would need to stop just acknowledging that their father did this to them and start to really dig into how unhealthy that is and in what ways that's unhealthy. But the reason that can be difficult is because they've already taken lessons from Kinzo about how to behave, and so they would then now need to acknowledge the ways in which they have been abusive. And again, not just like Rosa's very appeasing cycle, actually acknowledge the harm being done and acknowledge that it can't go on and that it is within them and their fault. There's an extent to which obviously, Kinzo, having initially inflicted the wound, is at fault too, but given later episodes and the overall themes of Umineko, you have to simply accept things as they are and then look at what you can do with what you have. Kinzo is dead by this point. There's no point in Rosa blaming a dead man when she herself is a fully grown woman who now abuses her own child. We get little snippets about how the different siblings would bully Rosa and why. A fun one is Kraus saying that because he's the older sibling, he's obviously smarter, despite the fact that Kraus seems to be maybe the least intelligent of all of the Ashurmia siblings, and he is clearly doing this because he wants to feel that. You don't tell someone I'm smarter than you if that's a self-evident thing. You tell them that because you are trying to convince them and yourself and anyone else who would care to listen. And when you get these little interactions between the kids bullying Rosa, it's clear that each of them is punching down because that's where they can operate, because that's where they can exert their power even as children. And then, obviously, there isn't a child lower in the rung for Rosa. And then we get what clearly has been told to Rosa to try and brush over this kind of bullying. It's common for unfair things to happen between kids, and you mustn't hold on to grudges for such things forever. With time, these memories get buried away, and forgetting them bit by bit is supposed to be part of growing up and becoming an adult. So becoming an adult is the same as separating yourself from all those memories. This bears a striking resemblance to the idea that a wound has healed but left something inside. These memories do not go away. Someone forgetting these memories does not mean that they suddenly have no effect on a person or their personality. It simply means that a person is no longer aware of or acknowledging them, that they have been pushed away, but they're still in there. And notably, Rosa says that she couldn't forget these things. These are not things Rosa even pushed away because she continued to remember this stuff. And consequently, according to Rosa, she does not become an adult because of this. We saw earlier in the episode, Rosa talked about how she has to pretend to be less intelligent than Ava because she doesn't want to show up Ava, because then Ava will get pissy with her. And in the same way, she has to fold herself in under the level of her other siblings because even in terms of maturity and growing up, she can't really upstage them, and at the same time is still stuck on stuff from their childhood that she has not resolved. And none of them have really resolved it either, but one thing that they all had that she does not is an outlet. An unhealthy outlet for bullying, but nonetheless, something they could do to deal with the in-the-moment feelings, whereas Rosa has simply held onto them and stewed on them. Beatrice then suggests that she could remove the memories entirely, but Beatrice claims that that wouldn't be healing at all, that would just be removing a problem, but is not the same as resolving it. And for this, you have to kind of think about how would that even happen? How would a person have memories erased, removed, or just dismissed from having ever happened in the first place? For Beatrice, one version of this could be if she was quote-unquote reincarnated and not told about her past, her history, her previous life or lives. And in that sense, that is a gift one cannot accept because they're not aware they've been given it until the gift is taken away and she is told about her past lives and comes to understand what was previously being quote-unquote given. But in terms of Rosa, she can take away her siblings, but Rosa is a person who has all of those memories. Rosa is a person who is the youngest child of the Higurashi family. An only child of the Higurashi family would simply not grow up to be this exact person. She would just be different. We can see a similar concept with Leon later in episode 7, who is simply just not the same as Beatrice or Shannon or Canon. Then both Rosa and Beatrice talk about how healing properly conveys a kind of joy as a reward for the pain that they have had to endure. And this to me just reads as a very concerning coping mechanism. As I said last time with Beatrice and Shannon, where Beatrice cannot accept the idea that love could be sincere, because to do so would be to acknowledge that the love she was subjected to was deeply unhealthy but deeply atypical, and not just how it always is. In the same way, both Rosa and Beatrice have to believe that the pain they are given has a reward attached, because it is otherwise deeply unfair that they would have to take this as children, deal with it, and try to move on and improve and grow up and just become better people in the face of this pain. That there must be a joy attached that is a reward at the end of it. There must be a reason that they went through all of it. And I wasn't 100% sure if this cynical read was where I wanted to align, but Beatrice says this: "You should be proud of your past sufferings. After all, they are what make it possible for you to know pleasure that those without pain will never experience. Those who experience this pleasure cannot help but pass the same joy to others." and then she cackles. Passing the joy onto others is the cycle of abuse. It is not a person who has sincerely healed from their trauma helping others to heal. It is someone who's been given the joy of these trials and tribulations, deciding to offload similar issues onto other people. One moment in the torture section that I actually found very interesting and very underplayed is the concept of the golden drop. The last drop of tea being the most special and precious drop of tea, and the idea that Beatrice, quote-unquote, harvesting this from a person, and that Beatrice can get multiple golden drops because she is a witch who can endlessly revive people. The thing that struck me about this is the point of a golden drop, the entire concept is for it to be the single last drop. If you have more than one, it is simply no longer as precious. It is no longer as rare or as special. And this is also true of actual gold. Gold's value is derived from its relative rarity. And that's both true in terms of the stock market or trading, but it's also true in terms of the reason people treasure gold as an idea is because it is rare, and when they come across it, it stands out. But if, say, you have an island basement chock full of gold, in a certain sense, the weight of the scale has an enormity, but an individual gold bar then means very little, relatively speaking. In the same way, the golden drop is diluting itself as a concept when Beatrice says she can get it endlessly. She is inventing something to get as many of these drops as possible, while effectively destroying the concept of it being the very last singular drop being important. And I too read the endless comeuppance of the Ashurmia siblings as basically being the way in which one can imagine endless scenarios of how someone might get comeuppance, and can be more satisfying than if, say, some horrible person just straight up died. They would simply be dead once and done. But that is not the kind of quote-unquote justice that Rosa is looking for, because Rosa wants them to feel the suffering she has felt through her life. Simply having them die, having them killed, will only give them a moment of that suffering. The idea that they could have it drawn out to this extent is, in a certain respect, tantalizing to Rosa, even as she is repulsed by it because Beatrice is also clearly torturing her too. And lastly, we have to talk about Maria. And this is so heartbreaking, as many Maria scenes are. The way Maria seems so keen to be of any help she can be, even if it's in service of what is effectively torture and what is an awful situation. And throughout all of this, Beatrice is taunting Rosa because this is quite literally things Rosa has wished for. In the very literal sense of biting off Ava's tongue, but also in the very abstract sense of Rosa probably does feel like her life would be simpler if she straight up just didn't have Maria anymore. That does not mean that Rosa has attempted to kill Maria or dispose of Maria in any way, but it does still mean that, in a certain respect, Beatrice isn't wrong, that this is something that Rosa would like, but doesn't want to have to deal with enacting. Part of Rosa's distress here is the idea that she has to enjoy the fruits of all this torture, which is obviously horrifying, and I do not blame her. But in effect, it stems from the idea that there are things Rosa wants, but she doesn't want to have to deal with enacting them, any of the consequences, or anything else of the sort. She would simply like for the things she wants to be handed to her, and to never have to think about what that entails. Later episodes will refer to the idea that on the game board, you cannot make a piece behave against its own character, and to be honest, I read a little bit the same here, that there is a version of Maria that not only is happy to be complicit in whatever it is that Rosa theoretically wants, but also Maria's only a little sad in this moment and half already suspects that she is simply a burden to her mother and that her mother would be happier without her. And very specific quote. And then maybe Mama will be happy I exist for the first time. Rough. And we have not even gotten to episode 4 yet. For the Witches' Tea Party, I don't have a ton to say, but I do want to address something people keep saying about Beatrice in these that I find a little bit funny. Lambda Delta says, about Beatrice, she sometimes mistakes her means for her ends, with the idea that Beatrice's means are the game board she has set up to have Battler play, and the idea that her ends are presumably to win. And I think that's actually a misread from Burn Castell and Lambda Delta. Both of them, because of their histories, are very concerned with ensuring that specific things do or do not happen. Beatrice has a deterministic endpoint, and so she is concerned only with the possibility space of the cat box. But also, Beatrice's end is to communicate something to Battler with this game. She is not seeking a result on the game board itself, she is seeking a result with her opponent. She wants Battler to learn the lessons of the game board and to become a person who could accept her, and accept the concept of witches. Her end is this. Her end is not to win, her end is to communicate this to Battler. And so this is just a way in which her intentions and her goals don't line up with theirs. And we'll see this come to a head by the end of the question arcs and flowing right into the answer arcs. But that's going to do it for this episode. We've concluded all of episode 2, we're rolling right on to episode 3, that one's going to be fun. So much, and new characters being introduced there, that'll be fun. But until then, thank you for watching, see you in the next video.